Okay, here we go. So there's our recording. And welcome. And I will go ahead and present then. Vanessa, do you know if the slides are coming up?
The slides should be up either through Sharon, I believe.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and there we go.
Oh, there we go. Beth has it on. And I also put it in the chat so you all can follow along that way too.
All right, well, I'll hand it over to Vanessa in a second. I just really want to express gratitude for you all being here. I know you have long days and it's sunny outside in Oregon, which does not always happen. So thank you for being here with us this afternoon. We've got a lot of great work. We're here with Sea Change, some other folks from the department, and we're just very excited that you're here tonight. So thank you.
Okay, the next slide is Beth, not Beth, Luce. There we go. Oops, Luce, you're muted.
Thank you for that. My name is Luz Rivera. I'm the Mental and Behavioral Health Education Leader, and I am with the Office of Education Improvement, Education Innovation and Improvement. I will be just focusing you on the community agreements, and for this evening, because we are all familiar with these, we agreed to these from the beginning. We would like you to just keep number 4 present and at the forefront of this conversation today, to keep hope. Even though we don't know what it looks like yet, don't lose sight of the end game. So that's where we are. And I'm going to pass it on over to our next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you for that, Luce. Really appreciate that. And yeah, just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the ongoing racial motivated violence that's happening in our country. The most recent one being in Buffalo, and just to name that oppression, bias, discrimination, and racism all cause trauma. And so just invite us here to take a moment to reflect on this quote by Alex Chevron-Vanette. I just finished reading her amazing book, which I highly recommend. And this is actually the last moment, the last page, the last kind of send off of her book. And I found it to be really resonating for this moment and for our time right now. So I would invite you just to read through it. And with that, also invite you to consider how we can embody this in our shared work and for our vision for SEL, especially as we start seeing things come and being woven into a report and into our recommendations. So just wanted to hold that present. And then Beth, if you can take us to the next slide.
Yeah, Vanessa, thank you for having us take that pause, and thank you everybody for pausing for a moment to reflect. This is a good time for us to revisit our group values that we identified earlier this year. And we were able to capture these in our heart that you see here. And so we ask that you identify one of our shared values that you see here that you want to pay attention to and attend to today. And just go ahead and take a look at those values and identify one. Great, I see some popping in the chat. Please feel free to put them in the chat. That's great. Equity, growth, collaboration, growth, integrity, connection, growth. Lovely. Please keep them coming. Seeing growth again. Love this. Thank you. And I'm going to hand it back over to Vanessa.
Yeah, so here's a little overview of our shared time together this afternoon, early evening. So our intention is to demonstrate how the work group's ideas are coming together in our report. We're going to have a chance to discuss our recommendations and also provide some clarity on decision-making and what our timeline is now looking like as we round out the CAPE for our work together. So there's an agenda of our time. And then if we can move to the next slide. So like we've done in the past, just to review and kind of recap where we've been, all the work that's been happening behind the scenes. Just want to celebrate that we have a draft, which is amazing. That's a really big deal because this is probably one of the hardest moments, right? There's that moment of the blank page and there are all these conversations and ideas. And here they are, they're in a form, they're taking shape. And it's really exciting to see, and we're really excited to hear from you and to see what your thoughts are, your feelings are in this first draft with us today. So just to also say, we've done some preliminary ODE engagement to have folks look at this based on the specialization that they're in and what really makes sense in terms of SEL. And so we've had folks at ODE look at the report, and they have had commenting access to kind of look at it and look at it from their perspective and from their lens. So those are the folks that have looked at it prior to our advisory group. And I have also been meeting with student success plan coordinators. So you'll most likely hear a little bit more about this, but we are starting to formalize an engagement process and opportunities to really hear strategically from our student success plan advisory groups at ODE. And there's just a lot of connections to SEL that we really want to uplift and elevate in their plans and look for opportunities to really bridge with our work here on this group. And so we will be hosting some upcoming dates in June to really hear from these particular advisory group members and invite them specifically to these sessions. So if you're interested in that kind of work, please email me or Beth, and we will make sure to involve you as much as you're willing and able to do so. So that's something that's upcoming. So I've met with all the success plan coordinators, and they're all named there in that slide. And I did actually meet also with the African American Black advisory group members themselves. So outside of just the coordinators, I was able to get in front of that advisory group and just share a little bit about our work and our shared vision where there's alignment with SEL, and then invite them specifically to these June sessions that we'll be hosting at ODE. And if we can go to the next one. Next slide. Awesome. So May is such a busy month, right? As we enter June, there's just a lot that goes on to closing out the school year. And it's just a really wonderful time to reflect, celebrate, say goodbye, dream about the summer, and really start planning and thinking about next year also. So it's just that really kind of crazy time where all of that happens. And I was just reminded of that I've got a school right in my neighborhood, and they had all this chalk art written all over the place because they celebrated their field day. So there's just all kinds of celebrations and things that are happening, and lots to be grateful for, even in hard, challenging times and moments. So with that, wanted to think about something that is connecting with you in terms of how you're feeling gratitude. And it could be gratitude for a place this year. It could be a gratitude for a person, an experience that you've gone through, maybe a skill that you've been able to develop or deepen, or an item even, something that's really carried you through, right? That's become really symbolic. It could be your water bottle, whatever that thing may be, just to take a moment to express that gratitude for that and with each other. So we will be moving into breakout rooms, and we'll spend about 5 minutes in those spaces, just connecting around something that we're grateful for. I guess we're not going to do this. That's funny.
That's what we said, right? We weren't going to do it.
Right, for this one.
Oh, for this one, we want, okay.
But it's okay.
Sorry about that. I clicked off the host and co-host option.
No worries. Now we'll be set up for the next one.
Vanessa, you got my message about the poll? No. With Sharon logged in my account to record, it's not letting me bring up the poll, and she's not able to bring it up on her end either.
Are you
So
able to recreate it now?
Can you recreate it?
I can't even log in. It won't even, it says you are logged in from another device. Your polling session is inactive.
When I click on poll, I can launch it, which might be
you?
dangerous.
Can you see it in there?
Well,
Yeah,
it's
I
in your,
see it. I
in
see
your,
it too.
in your meeting
Okay.
control right at the bottom of your screen, Beth. Yeah.
Yep, yeah. When I push it, I get inactive. It won't let me. So if somebody else will do it, that'd
I
be
can try to
fantastic.
launch it since I'm asking the question. And if
Yes.
it doesn't work, we could do a waterfall of, well,
What's the names though? I
that-
could make a Google Doc really quick, a Google form.
oh, we could just have an informal discussion as a second backup, Amy, so that you don't have to do that. I'm not trying to adapt too much in the middle of a meeting right now. It just could be the Monday vibes. I feel like the universe is saying something. if the
Yeah.
poll doesn't work.
I'm going to be like Pooja.
Yeah.
I'm your copycat, but I'm just going to be here.
The universe says, don't do a poll, don't do a poll.
I would like to know, does anybody know if Mercury is in retrograde? Because there's all sorts of signs
It
right
was.
now.
There's
Google.
something.
It's Mercury and Earth.
Is someone Googling it?
I am. I'm curious.
May 10th through June 30. Yes, see? There you go.
Yep.
It is.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
I don't typically rely on that because I think that the world is always full of communication issues, but there's something in the map
Oh,
past
yeah.
week. I
Are you kidding me?
noticed.
The moon, the stars, and the planet in the middle of the universe? Of course it does. Oh, goodness.
Vanessa, are they coming back at 4:51 or 4:50?
450, yeah.
Okay.
Right on time.
Perfect.
Some things are happening for us.
Well,
Or with us, I should say.
yeah.
So there are 12 folks today.
Just so you know, I take attendance each time in that document so we do have a track of attendance, if that's helpful, just to know who's not there, who's there in the folder.
Hi, Jim. Welcome. We're just about to come back from Mercury retrograde space. So everybody will be back in about a minute.
Jim, apologies. I think you might have the old invite. So I forwarded you the new invite from like months ago. Sorry if you maybe might have not. I see your name on the invite, so I'm not sure if maybe it just wasn't accepted at that time. I'm not sure. You're here. That's what's important.
And Jim, I just put the slideshow in the chat for you.
All right, I think we're back. And it's always nice when people come back with smiles from those spaces. So thank you all.
All right. Well, nice to see you all again. I'm Amy with Sea Change. I use she, her pronouns, and my colleague Pooja is here as well. And we want to show the next slide, Sharon. Thank you. Connect to where we left off last meeting. So in the last meeting, if you'll remember, we spent quite a bit of time connecting back to what are the essential elements, essential components of a vision for SEL, and really wanting to make sure that we were holding that vision and big picture as we move towards the finish line of this work. So we spent time in this conversation around what do you not want to lose sight of in this process. And we heard a lot in that meeting and saw in the reflections a lot around holding a vision for this work that is centered around SEL that goes beyond focusing just on student behaviors or student standards, and really a lot around systems change, around organizational conditions, around support for adults, support for implementation, anti-racist goals. If you go to the next slide, please, Sharon. These are some of those big themes that we captured there. So really thinking about strengths-based, integrated across systems. Some of the pieces I mentioned, educator and student voice, helping guide this work. And we also heard after last meeting that some of you really wanted to see how we connected this vision back to the work you had already done and moved us forward in creating the documents that are required, the work that is required of this work group. And so if we go to the next slide, we hope that you've begun to see some of those connections in the report where the vision meets the work that you've done already and how those pieces can live together. So today we'll start to get into initial impressions of that draft report. We'll spend some time discussing these initial draft recommendations and elevating where we need to spend more time digging in together. And then we'll get some clarity on decision-making, how we're going to make decisions, and a timeline for completing this phase of work. So that's the plan for today that we'll walk you through. I will turn it over to Pooja.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. So we're going to dig into just providing you with an overview of what the report structure is like first, just to orient you. And then in a few moments, we're going to give you about 20 minutes of time just to read it on your own, knowing that you're all very busy with full-time jobs and may not have had a chance to dig into it yet. So we're going to give you that time in just a moment. But first, I'm going to start with giving you an overview of the report. So this is a screenshot of the table of contents, and really the top part of it, all the way from the forward that could come from you all to the exec summary. There's a lot of yellow highlight in the report that you'll see, which is really just placeholder language and things to come back to. But we wanted to frame up the recommendations that is really the heart of your work with some of the context. So we've done a lot of work pouring through the notes from prior meetings and the recordings from prior meetings and all of the work that you've done in between meetings and in your smaller work groups to try to integrate and bring into the framing of this report everything that you've really already done, plus some more supplemental material that aligns with what you've already started working on. And so you'll see some the background on what the legislation is that brought this group together. There's a discussion about what's the research say about SEL components really related on equity specifically, as where's Oregon compared to the rest of the country. And then we've also built in a landscape scan that will give you all an opportunity to elevate some of the work that you have done in your own communities as an opportunity, as well as bringing in other work that has been done by ODE that you'll be able to see in that landscape scan. So that's all the setup, but really the heart of your work is, of course, in the recommendations. So what that is that we brought in the guiding principles that you all have already worked on. We've brought in an analysis of the frameworks that you've already reviewed. And by frameworks, we mean looking at the CASEL framework, the transformative SEL framework, as well as another framework that from Education Trust that I think one of the work groups worked on. And then we have more placeholder language in the recommendations section. So this section in the recommendations is probably needs the most work and obviously is the heart of what we'll be doing together over this meeting as well as the subsequent few meetings. So if you go to the next slide. So we've had a lot of conversation in this group around framework and standards. And so what we thought might be helpful is to offer a potential way of looking at how are frameworks and standards actually interconnected. As a step back, you'll remember that this advisory group was brought together by the legislation that said that you all have to provide recommendations for standards and for a framework for K-12 students. And so one way to look at it that is that the framework is actually inclusive of the student standards and much more. So starting from the bottom up, if you read this, that the guiding principles are really the foundation from which you're building this framework. Then the pillars, if you were to think about the architecture or the structure of a house, the pillars are student-centered standards, what do students need to know and do, and then system standards. And we've talked a lot about this in high-level terms. So that's what does the system need to do in order to create the conditions for students on the left pillar to have to do what is required over there. So they're very much interconnected, but we've had less conversation about the system standards. And then the gray bar is really the implementation considerations and opportunities. So this group has been really thoughtful about implementation. And so this could look like, what should the State Board of Education consider for successful implementation for whatever you all come up with? So that could be part of the framework is the way that this is outlined. Go to the next slide. So if you click, so what specifically could this framework look like based on what you've already discussed so far? If you click, the guiding principles, equity and access, strengths-based, transforming systems, trauma-informed, developmentally appropriate, alignment with ODE initiatives and partnership. Those are guiding principles from the work that you've already done and that have been brought in draft form. Again, everything is still changeable based on your feedback today. We really just wanted to give you a draft to have reactions. So that's why we're providing you with kind of a straw person proposal. Next, click. So we've had conversations about student standards, and you've had conversations specifically about CASEL and transformative SEL focal constructs. And so if that sounds kind of wonky to you, you'll have a little bit more time to read a little bit about that in the report. And then we want to check for understanding after you've had a chance to read the report on whether we need to provide more background on what some of these things are, like CASEL. Next, click. The system standards, like I said, we're going to have more conversation this meeting and the next couple of meetings about what those could look like in more detail. And then lastly, if you click once more, the implementation considerations and opportunities is also, there's been conversation, these words about we need to think about implementation, we need to think about how the system is creating the conditions for students to learn. We've talked a little bit about that, but there's more work to be done to be more concrete in the report itself. Next slide. So you might have seen on the pillars on the previous two slides, there was the word fundamental. So we're not developing the standards themselves, we're developing the fundamentals. So what do we mean by this word fundamentals? Aren't we actually developing the standards themselves? Well, we'd posit not quite. The legislation that created this advisory group said this group is tasked with providing recommendations for a framework and standards for K-12 students. It did not ask for the standards themselves, and it recognized in the legislation that that work would happen between September 15th of this year and September of next year. So what you're trying to do is to give that high-level architecture of the fundamentals of student standards and system standards and implementation considerations, and then another group will be brought together to translate your high-level recommendations into concrete standards. Next slide. So in practice, what does that mean we're not doing? This is a screenshot from California's framework and standards for self-awareness. And you can see this does get into the developmentally appropriate and quite detail about what students should know how to do. And we're saying this is not necessarily the work of this phase to get to September. This is the work that translates what you're going to come up with between September of this year and September of next year. Okay. I just, I want to pause there and just see if there's any questions. Does this resonate, or any concerns that are coming up for you just on what I shared just now? Okay, thanks. I see some thumbs up. So we'll keep going. We'll give you more time. Will there be overlap between the two groups? I think I should let an ODE staff person probably respond to what's the recent thinking about that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We're just starting to talk about those pieces. And so my hope would be that there would be some overlap, but we also want to make sure that we have space for current educators, because teachers are the ones that are going to be implementing a lot of these standards. So there'll be a mix, and there'll be an application process to figure out who will be on that next phase. So more to tell later.
All right. So you'll have more time to interact with the report. I'm just going to get through a couple more slides before we go into a break. You click ahead. So I'm just getting a little bit more concrete into what I've just shared of an example of what a recommended framework for that student standard pillar could look like. And this is just, again, reflecting back to you some of the work that you've already done of what it could look like. Again, this is all just to get reactions today, to make adjustments going forward. The next slide. And an example of what a recommended framework for system standards could look like. We know it can be hard to think in abstract. So what we did is looking at a lot of the notes from your previous meetings, the Jamboards. It seemed like there were some common themes that are showing up about the types of conditions that need to be in place for students to have what they need around SEL. And so it's things like school conditions, it's supporting educators and administrators to support students. We've talked about licensure from TSPC, positive identity and school culture, and then community collaboration and state role. We've also talked a little bit about, but not super explicitly. So we just want to acknowledge that these are, again, room for more discussion to see if these types of things resonate, and we could replace whatever you want. All right, next slide. So what we're going to do is 3 steps. So first, we're going to give you 20 minutes, which feels very luxurious in meeting world. Maybe it's just me, to read the report. And if you've already read the report, then maybe dig into the recommendations section, which needs more work, or any of the yellow highlighted parts throughout the report. So we're going to give you 20 minutes to read. And then we're going to do a poll to check for understanding on a couple of key concepts. And then we'll have time to get into pairs and full group discussion. So why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute break right now. Feel free to turn your camera and mic off, and we'll return from the break at 5:10. And I see a question about if you can leave comments in the doc. Yes. Right, Vanessa? No. Okay. Vanessa will respond when we get back.
We didn't make it. I thought we were going to capture it first on our own internal
okay. Yeah.
later. And then after this meeting, we were going to open it up to comments.
Yes. What she said. Thank you. All right. Welcome back from the break. All right, so what we're going to do now is just give you the 20 minutes to read and dig into the report yourself. You should have the link in the chat for the report. Vanessa just shared it at 5:06. And then I'm just going to share a couple questions for you to ponder just as a guide as you read, which is what's resonating for you in the report, what's unclear, and what's missing. So I'll give you until 5:30, so 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and do a quick poll to check for understanding. So 5:30. Feel free to turn your camera back off and read away. Thought. Feel free to come back on camera just so I can see a few more folks. Awesome, thank you everybody. So we are going to give you time to discuss in pairs and in the full group, but just on kind of your initial reactions. Before we do that, we have a couple questions that we want to ask you in a super low stakes anonymous poll, just to check for understanding on a couple of big meaty topics that are either explicitly or implicitly referenced in the report. So I'm going to launch a poll, and I'll just tell you that the two concepts are around how well you feel like you understand the integrated model of mental health. And it's we really invite your honest kind of responses of how well we've done at kind of communicating some of these complex topics. There was discussion at I think the first two meetings that you all had about the integrated model of mental health. And so part of what we want to do is to check for understanding on that model, and it can inform our future work on whether there's more context that we need to be able to share there, because the integrated model of mental health is part of the legislative intent that created this, the need for the social emotional advisory group. It was part of the legislative intent. So we want to make sure that we have an understanding of how well we've done at communicating that clearly to you all. And the second question is really around how well we've done in kind of communicating the relationship between the CASEL student competencies and the transformative SEL focal constructs. Again, these are really wonky terms. If you haven't been part of some of the work groups, it's totally okay if these are relatively new concepts for you, but we want to make sure that we're all going to move together with one voice, and it's going to be helpful for us to have this pulse check on where we are at. So I'm going to launch this poll and give you a few minutes to respond. And this is just for advisory group members. If you're a staff person of any agency, even as a consultant to this group, we ask for you not to participate in this poll. This is really for the advisory group members who work in communities across the state. Give it one more moment as I can see this start to populate. Is there anybody else who needs to respond to this that hasn't had time? Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Now I'm going to share the results. Can you all see the results? That's funny. I guess I can. So on the first question of integrated model of mental health, it looks like most folks are between a 4, understanding it pretty well, possibly missing a few pieces. A 3, I can name the purpose and some of the components. And then a couple people said, I don't know what it is and couldn't describe it. So between a 4, a 3, and a 2 on the integrated model. And then for the second question around CASTLE and the focal construct, it seems like we've got about a third in number 5. We can describe the relationship to others, same amount to can understand the relationship, but I'm not sure. Okay, and and then 3, there's 1. Okay. This is super helpful. Thank you for humoring us on this so that we can kind of have a better understanding of where we're at on that. So as we have our discussions in small groups and in your pairs as well as the full group, if you have other questions, if you have questions, specific questions about those 2 concepts, feel free to share it, but it's also good data for us as facilitators to know where we could strengthen a little bit, but it looks like there's a fair amount of shared understanding, so that's great. So now we're going to transition to the pair share. So we're going to spend the next 10 minutes just really reflecting with a colleague of yours here, what resonates, what's unclear, and what's missing. And we have a Google Doc that Amy has just shared in the chat so that you can put your notes in that document about what's coming up for you in the report. So are the groups ready? There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So you'll have 10 minutes. We'll come back at 5:45. I'm not sure if there's an easy way to screenshot this. So
I just screenshotted the poll results.
Okay, good. I was going to take a picture.
And we're still recording, correct?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. It's quiet work this evening with all of the processing that they're doing. I hope those breakouts are working for them.
Me too. That's great, Sharon. Thank you.
I actually think there's another group of 3 as well, because Angela and Daniel are on the same.
That's kind of cute. They're taking it together. Then it looks like Melinda. Oh, hey, Annie and Melinda.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
In my breakout room, I can't hear Jackson, so I don't know. I'll try and go back and tell Jackson.
Oh, no. Okay.
Can you put me back? How do I go back?
How do I go back?
Sharon needs to put you back, I believe.
Okay,
I
thanks.
can try to. Click on you.
Okay, hold on.
What room was it?
3.
Room 3. And
You see a breakout room button on the bottom bar?
Join breakout room. There it is.
Then
Thanks.
you can click join, perhaps.
yeah, there you go. Thank you, Pooja.
And Melinda.
Oh, and Melinda could join that group too. That might be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see if it's Jackson's audio or Annie's mic.
I'll hop in there and check on them and I'll come back out.
I don't have a room 3 anymore. I don't know why.
I noticed that on mine too. I don't have a room 3.
Strange.
I do have a room 3.
Oh, there it is. But now Alexa's in and
Alexa went to check on them.
right. But what I'm saying is it wasn't showing me a room 3 disappeared. Now it's back when Alexa went in, but I can't even pick up Melinda to assign her there. It's like it's not letting me pick her up and send it. See, there's no room 3 on there for her. I'm wondering if she's supposed to be somewhere
I think
else.
it's because, well,
Well,
what
she
it
hasn't
says-
joined, but I just messaged her. She
Yeah.
should be able to go into breakout room and then it's room number 3.
Okay, all right, great.
Could you hear Annie, Alexa?
Yeah,
Okay,
they
good.
were good. They got it figured out. And it's, yeah, and then it looks like Melinda, if she just comes in, she can just press join on that one. Perfect.
Hmm.
Or just that crash was in my kitchen, but. I'll figure it out.
Does anybody have room 3? And can you see Melinda? I know she's no longer here, but I don't see her listed there.
No, she looks like she left the meeting.
Okay, hopefully she'll come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really strange having 2 of you. One on top of the other.
No, I changed her name down at the bottom when
Okay.
I
That's
realized
Sharon.
thought that I was sharing. Yeah, when you thought I was sharing the PowerPoint, I was like, oh, that's right. She still has my name on there.
Well, at one point when you popped up and the 2 screens popped up, I thought it was 2 screens and you with these 2, and it was Amy. I was just not,
Was it?
I didn't, well, because she's wearing that darker green with the collar. And so I just kind of quickly looked. I know she's wearing glasses, but you know, it was just the matter of all of a sudden, I thought you grew into triples. We need,
I love watching the document populate. It's always like
yes.
good. And I I have FOMO. I like being in part of these discussions, but I was able to interact with the report
That's good.
late night in Jacksonville, Florida by myself.
Aw.
eating Fritos.
Was that your vacation that you were doing that?
No.
Work? Oh, oh my gosh, that's rough. Did you enjoy the Fritos at least? No, I would have. All right, ladies, we're doing pretty well. It seems like they're moving along. 5:41. And what time do they come back again?
At 5:45.
Okay, we are ready.
Shall I broadcast a message to the rooms?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Alexa, don't you wish you were a writing teacher like in these days with all the tools that you can do in terms of collaborating and sharing? Like, how did we do this? It was just
Well,
so
I used to
different.
walk around with stacks of papers to all my children's soccer games and whatnot, so that might be harder.
Oh, I'm so happy I don't have to do that, I have to say.
But I will say it is nice to collaborate. I mean, helping.
Yeah.
It is really, Google Docs is a great collaborative tool for sure. Folks should be coming back in just a moment. And we've got a couple of you already, so that's awesome. There we go. All right, welcome back. Welcome back. All right. So now it was just our time to just have a conversation as a full group of what was coming up for you on your own or in those pairs or triads that you were just in. Just we're really interested in just starting where you're at, of what generally resonated or what felt like unclear. I've seen a lot of the comments already in the reflections document. So does somebody want to kick us off, and we'll just go from there, just about what came up for you?
Just throw in a reminder too that some people feel a lot more comfortable speaking up in the big group. The chat is always available if you want to start there, if that's more comfortable. And we will try to invite people into the conversation if we haven't heard from you in a bit, just to make sure there's space for your voice if you want to bring it into the room.
I'm one of those people that's always comfortable, probably too comfortable talking. Let me be concise. I think there was like 3 or 4 bullet. We didn't have enough time to debrief, but okay. In the research section, I think there's probably an opportunity there to directly respond to like a socio-political narrative that we know exists. So, for example, in the Crisis of Disrupted Learning report, or in school districts that I visited, people are expressing that children and students are coming in with significant needs, right? And that the context of COVID, it's just, it's more challenging than ever in regards to children's behaviors and their social emotional development. And I think we can respond to that with some ideas that kind of set us up for the rest of the framework. So for example, I think some of the sections where we were naming issues of like stress or toxic stress, we could put further up into the document and say that one of the best ways to mitigate or to counteract against toxic stress is supportive adult relationships. And teachers oftentimes serve as secondary attachment, sometimes even primary attachment figures for students, and things like that. I think we can name in the research section. A question we had around the recommendations around the CASEL and the transformative SEL section was, those are frameworks that help us to organize and think about our standards, but would we also name practice-based frameworks like restorative justice, or in early childhood, there's positive discipline, conscious discipline, collaborative problem solving. There's all these kinds of practice-based frameworks that we're saying, oh, the ideas inherent to some of these practice-based framework align with what we're saying, can show up in the standards later on, right? Not saying that we're gonna, that it has to be based off of, Jane Nelson's book or whatever, right? But like we can name and I'm sure in this group we can name resources and ideas and have a good citation list of things that we think are promising ideas. There was another.
Can I pause you right there,
Yeah.
Subin, and just ask a clarifying question of how you all talked about this? Were you talking about like practice-based standards as part of implementation considerations? Or if you're trying to think about that image with the pillars, do you think of it as a third pillar? I'm just wondering if you've thought about that.
I'll be honest and say, I don't think we thought about it.
I'm just trying to get an understanding if it's more of an implementation consideration, or if it's more of like a structural, like this is part of the system, or yeah. Anyway, it's okay if you haven't. It's a good point that we can put in the parking lot for sure.
I think either way has its pros and cons, and so I defer to you guys. And then the last thing we were talking about were those the multiple places where we were, a couple of places where we were naming our guiding values. We talked about how in like when we're naming and talking about equity, I think we could be a little bit more more forward and more forceful about what we think and what we believe about equity, and calling out race and racism and how it's been operating in schools. I think we can be a little more honest about it.
Yeah, thank you, Subin. And Fran, yes, the answer is yes. You should have access to this after the meeting if you want to return to it. Are there other groups that would like to share? Or Jill, is there anything you wanted to add from your group? No? Okay. I'm seeing some group has talked about a theory of action would be helpful. Can you say more about what you had in mind there?
So I think that was us, me and Angela and Daniel. And just like a bold and dynamic statement, like if we build a social emotional learning framework in Oregon, then, you know, and then state the outcome, what's going to happen. And then I like to add it because we believe in changing and in supporting students, but sort of taking more of these academic concepts that we're writing in this recommendation and just saying very clearly in a clear, concise statement why we believe social emotional learning is foundational to create an education space where educators and students are thriving. And I think too, we both, you know, I'll just say that too, that we also called out that we did appreciate the brain science as well. And really, we've talked about in this group, and there's, I think, a lot of other conversations going on in Oregon and other groups about how we're calling for a revolution in how we actually go about education. This isn't a minor tweak to the industrial model of kids sitting in rows and going to classes on bells. This is a real request to change the way we even think about how we construct schools and how students learn.
I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Thank you
love
for
that.
sharing that.
I think there are some, I agree with that. And I really appreciate that characterization of what we talked about, and think there's also like, we should do SEL in service of increased academic achievement, which, I mean, that's lovely. But I think there is something that's transcendent about SEL. Like someone can really get a 4-point, be a valedictorian, and be missing a lot of the glue of life and the critical things. This names like SEL names like humaning on a level that's excluded from almost every academic. I mean, I'm a secondary health educator, and I think health touches upon, as Suzanne Hitty's contributions, you know, events. Health touches on quite a number of SEL competencies, But I mean, that there's one credit in high school and it's hit and miss in middle schools. And so this is about embedding it in the system. But I think sometimes when we say, oh, we have to do this because it'll increase academic, I know that's like speaking the language that people want to hear. And it's like about currency, but it also sort of obfuscates a reality that some of those things aren't academic. And that's the problem. Like, it's not the business of schools to cultivate like self-awareness and and self-regulation, connection. These kind of awarenesses haven't been envisioned by, I would argue, in our work, Angela, and I find the many adults in the systems at this moment do not believe this is the business of school. Right? So there's a lot of work to do there, but I think it's important to not always couch like we should do this because it'll serve academic achievement. It will serve, one would hope, to lead to more just, vibrant, and well world.
Yeah, so it's much bigger than academic, clearly, from what you're sharing. Yeah, hear that. Thank you.
Can I just say, I completely 1000% agree with you. And, working in a large district, trying to help the decision makers and budget holders know it's going to move the academic needle. Like having a document that does clearly articulate how that is there. And maybe that is just
Yeah, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think you can state that point, but you don't want to miss the other one.
Agreed. Yeah, thank you.
It's a both and is what I'm hearing. Academic outcomes are important and related to SEL, and their benefits are much greater than academic. That's what I'm hearing. Jim, did you have a comment as well? I saw that you unmuted.
I did. I agree with both Daniel and Jill. Sometimes that academics can be a hook for administrators. For example, when I talked about our dialectical behavioral therapy program, I can say that it increases, our program evaluation shows that it increases GPA by an average of 0.6. And on the other hand, in our policies and procedures, like for when we take a look at students with disabilities and other students, we are not only required to take a look at academics, we're also required to take a look at social and emotional learning. So there is precedent within the school system for concentrating and acknowledging that sometimes, we'll have those 3.8, 4.0 students that still have identified social and emotional needs that the school needs to serve.
Absolutely. I see that you're getting some +1s in the chat as well. I'm noticing also in some of the comments in the document, we really need more student voice in this document. Wondering if anybody can share, where do you see that coming in? Is it in the research and community engagement? Is it in frameworks that students have outlined? You can share what you had discussed.
I can share a little bit. I'm actually a student right now. So something I've been working with, and actually, I'm a part of Oregon Student Voice as well, which I saw called out in this report as well. But something we've been really trying to discuss is we're doing an okay job in Oregon at centering students in our decisions. But something we're trying to kind of reframe is how we can be student-led. So instead of just centering adults on making sure we're doing what's best for students, actually having students at the table leading these discussions or telling you what is best for them instead of making that automatic assumption or preconception, I guess, that we all know what is best for students who are experiencing the day-to-day standards and instruction of these SEL standards. So I'd like that called out a little bit in this.
So, so for you, it's important to make that distinguish clearly between student-led and student input. And so naming that distinction feels like it could satisfy. I just was wondering if there's anything, because clearly we can definitely do that. I'm wondering if there's any other student engagement that you know of, Jackson, other than the Oregon Student Voice Report and some of the other reports that are called out in the report that have had students coming to the table and saying, this is what's important to us. Is there anything more like that that you can think of, in addition to having us incorporate more of that distinction of student-led and why that's important?
You'll have to give me a couple minutes to think about that, but I
Yeah,
think
no,
off the
sure.
top of my head, calling out somewhere in the standards of trying to shift the paradigm of just having a teacher lecturing at someone about, like, here's what you need to know about SEL. Since SEL is largely relationship driven, developing those relationships includes making sure that students understand their worth in the classroom. So something about uplifting students and student experience in standards or in the classroom would be important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point about having maybe integrating it into the student leadership into the process recommendations as one avenue to address your point, Jackson.
Well, what Jackson and I talked about too is that I'm looking at like this language is what do students need to know and do, instead of about like what are students bringing to and like co-creating with their adults. I think, Jackson, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to see some of what Jackson talked about maybe in the framing of this whole document. I mean, Fran's comment in there that when life is hard, school's harder. So little things become very complex when your life is kind of messy. And so utilizing these tools and skills and the people around you in a relational way makes a big difference. It'd be kind of nice to have that up in the front end, maybe to frame it for us.
I think I love the quote and the idea of naming that. I think that calls out, or it infers or implies that educators needed to have a more kind of structural view, a systemic view around what's going on with students, right? As opposed to blaming individuals or saying that we need to fix individual kids and things like that. I think also part of what I'm hearing in Jackson's comment and what we're talking about here is the mindset and overall approach, again, around practice in SEL, right? So it's not just about talking at a kid or lecturing them or teaching, giving an SEL lesson for 30 minutes a week, or, all those ideas that I know we've talked about in different small groups and things like that, as those ideas don't work. And so I'm wondering if there's a place in this document where we can just really just lay things out. Like, we have talked about, things that we know are not the promising practices. And the section that I'm thinking about is that truth and myth section, as a place to kind of elevate some of those discussions that we've been having.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, part of what this is making me wonder as we get into like the recommendations piece too is how people are seeing those sit together. So we offered like one model of how the pieces, sorry, I have an angry dog in the background, of how those pieces sit next to each other: student standards, system standards, guiding principles, implementation piece. And in some of these comments, especially around like ways this could go wrong or pitfalls, things to look out for, I'm wondering how you all see sort of protecting against that in the way these are laid out. And maybe that question is not coming off clearly. I think some of what I'm hearing is like a nervousness, especially in the pieces that Jackson was sharing around how do we make sure that people just don't do the student focus first because that's what they're used to or maybe have the tools to do. I don't know if that came up in your conversations too, if anyone wants to speak to that. Annie, I don't know if that's to this point. Figure 2 seems to be better able to show
Yeah,
across the
I guess I
different-
was thinking like that it shows these back and forth arrows at least, and like the connection point, that it's not like I guess like how do those things work together? It seems to capture that more. So I don't know if there's some arrows that we could add or something that shows like it's not just you have this pillar of what you do to kids. It's like how do we, yeah, that like back and forth arrow is helpful, and something that clumps it that says like this has to be people working in relationship with one another. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sorry, I've talked a lot. What I'm trying to imagine is like, I'm trying to imagine if I or whoever was receiving these recommendations, how would I then utilize and wield these recommendations as I'm creating standards in September 2022, right? And I think some of the things that we can name are not just about like, we talked about these things, but we're saying, we can say, please do not have standards that 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 are not dialogical, or not that are assume that children need to be fixed, or like I think we can like name some of those things like really directly, yeah, I think that's how I'm feeling. I don't know if other people feel that way.
Yeah, I'm curious if others are feeling the same way, feeling differently. You see some, I like that idea. Also wondering how the integrated model might fit into this. There are quite a few people who felt like they had a good understanding of that model. And I wonder if that helps support this kind of conversation about how the pieces feed off of each other. Anyone seeing connections there? Mhm. You don't have to go there. There's other pieces you're holding that have been part of the conversation or that haven't come up yet. I'd love to invite them in. Yeah, I see in the chat what SEL is not. Don't know if Deidre or Jen or Kristen want to offer anything. Are you holding anything on this conversation?
I really appreciate what other people are talking about. They were not the direction that we went in my particular conversation, so I was just kind of listening to other things. We were talking about the education trusts framework and kind of how that fit into the pillar model. And it felt like in the draft document here that it was kind of set up to be a CASEL or transformative SEL or education trusts framework. But Kristen and I were really talking about how those two frameworks really seem to go together really well. And that the education trust framework, this idea of kind of refocusing these, shifting the focuses on sort of the bigger, broader things, was very much related still to the skills of the students. And so we thought they went well together, and we felt like the draft really made it seem like we needed to choose between them. And so we were just kind of grappling with that from what we know about the education trust framework and the transformative SEL framework.
I have a clarifying question for Deidre, if you don't mind, Pooja. I'll make it quick. So are you referring to the highly successful models, that title, or the standards and practices document? Do you recall?
I'm looking at figure 7 on
okay.
page
Yes.
26.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yes, but when you said it, I was just like, okay, I want
yeah.
to go grab it, and I want to make sure that I know what part, because there are two separate documents. Thank you. You're right in the figure that's in the document.
Oh yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Okay.
that we were discussing that, and
Mhm.
this idea of yeah, how those were integrated.
Yeah, so it's the figure 7 in our own document.
Correct.
And then going back to Subin, was it Subin? There's another clarifying question and I can't remember what it was. So I will give it back to the group. Pooja.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we really wanted to have this initial discussion about the draft because it's much easier to say, oh, this is really resonating or this is really off. We need to bring in other types of frameworks once you have something to react to. Let's understand what do we need to bring back for the next conversation that we all have. And just to clarify, I think this is a really good flag of the recommendation options. There's an abundance of options. We can just have a hybrid of options. And so I think what is really going to be helpful is if we can start to get to some clarity starting at the next meeting of like all of the frameworks that we've put on the table. How do you want to piece them together? What is most meaningful to you and how you all have talked about them for the past several months? And so it's getting to that point where you all are going to have to be making some really important decisions about how to bring the theoretical into the practical of what it means for what goes in front of the State Board of Education. And so I think this is a good segue to transition into, I think, Vanessa first to provide you with an overview of how are we going to get there. We've got a draft and we've got more work to do. And Vanessa's going to walk through a timeline and when we're going to start to make some decisions about this stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja. And Sharon, if we can go back to the slide deck and open it back up to slide 22. And those of you that are on the slide deck, if you can find your way to slide 22, there's a lot of dates and just a timeline sharing where we're heading. Yeah, so to look at May, we're going to have some initial discussion of pros and cons for each potential recommendation. So that's kind of what will be taking place. We'll be identifying where more discussion, community engagement, and our research is needed. So that's kind of the bulk of our work heading into our next meeting. And then defining the relationship between standards and frameworks. So just like you all surfaced today, thinking about how are those going to connect, where are we going to look for pieces that we're going to integrate, what does that actually look like? So that's in May. And then in June, when we meet in our next meeting, we will be using the FIST to 5 in terms of actually voting or processing how we're responding to the recommendations. So the goal is to really be at consensus. But if we are not there, then we may decide to note questions or caveats or things that are worrisome to us and just capture those in a document as well. But we are going to, yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted to add there that the intention isn't to get to consensus in June, that we're starting now just to know where people are at in June to get to consensus in July and August. So it'll be a first check. But the intention is not to reach consensus in that first check.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, at that point, we'll have some initial engagement from our student success plan coordinators that we've invited and their advisory groups to those June ODE hosted sessions. So we'll be able to have that information. And that will help us identify where there's more discussion, community engagement, and our research that is needed. And then we'll start moving into identifying volunteers for writing the foreword and other aspects that still need to be fleshed out in the report. So it's really hard to do in such a big group with so many people, but we'll start moving kind of more into smaller groups to make that happen. And then July, so really between June and July in our advisory group meetings, we'll revise the recommendations. And so that we're really kind of ready to review them in July. So that's kind of at that point where we're moving on with what those recommendations will be. So that's the second round of FIST to 5. And we'll discuss any additional changes or discussion needed at any aspect of the report at that time. And that brings us to August. And so by August, we really want to have that final report draft, right, ready. And that's really our chance just to look it over and review it for one last look. And then vote on any unresolved recommendations and make any final discussion on process or next steps that we feel are necessary at that time. And then think about preparing for the state board meeting. So we need some of you to be part of that. So just thinking about that now, who might that be? If that may be someone, that may be yourself. So thinking about coming in front of the board and sharing the recommendations that you all have landed on. And then September, the report is finalized, it is submitted, and then we go forward in our presentation. So that's an overview of all those pieces coming together. And then slide 24 is the consensus-based decision-making process that we'll use. It's pretty similar to the one we have already used. Some of the language is a little bit different and more strength-based, and that's why we're going to move towards this one. But again, we'll spend more time in our upcoming advisory meetings to be grounded in this protocol. So just wanted you to be able to see it now. Okay, and with that, I will turn it over back to Amy, who's going to lead us through our last moment and thoughts before we close out.
I will move us into reflection. I will share, similar to how we did last time, we'll use this Google Doc to share our reflections, things that you're sitting with, questions you're sitting with, feedback, concerns, things that are top of mind as we close today. We recognize we could have spent many hours discussing that draft report, but glad that you had something to respond to and hopefully started to see how a vision and some details about framework and standards are falling into place together. We heard a lot of good feedback today around what you think is missing and how these pieces might come together even more in the recommendations. So let's take 4 minutes and reflect in the doc. Take a few more minutes. So if you feel like you're done writing, you might want to look at other people's comments too and see if you want to reflect or ask questions of each other. Okay. Thank you all for sharing and reflecting in there. I wonder, before we move to close, we didn't exactly speak to in the timeline, but Vanessa, if you wanted to mention, like, we do plan to send a report out and what that could look like. Do you want to say anything about that?
Do you mean send it out to the state board ahead of time?
No, sorry, maybe I'll just say it. We got your like big level, high level reflections in this meeting. When we send out another draft, we will give commenting access at some point so that you can comment directly in the draft about things you're seeing or want to dig in on. That's all I was meaning with that piece. Sorry.
It's okay. It just happens that the cat walked by and my dog is losing it. Yes, I need to change the settings and become the actual owner. So just give me a moment. I need to transfer it to a new document so that I can give you all commenting access. So that will happen. Yep, starting probably tomorrow.
Great. Turn it over to Beth.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to have us end today with reflecting back on our shared values that we talked about at the beginning and which ones we're noticing in the report. So just take a moment to think about which one of these values have been showing up and which ones you notice surface the most from the report and in our conversations today. And we just want you to add those to the chat. So again, which ones have you been noticing showing up most today in the report and our conversations? So I'm seeing lots of collaboration, growth, integrity, compassion. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for leaning in today and contributing. And I'm going to hand it back over to Vanessa to wrap us up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Just really appreciate your engagement, your love, your participation, your conscientiousness, all the conversations, and your appreciation. It couldn't be done without you. And I just am really resonating with what Annie put in the document. She said, this process has been overwhelming, confusing, and also hopeful. And I just think that really captures our journey, and just really appreciative for all of you. And I believe we are the ones we've been waiting for, and excited to continue on with you all. So have a great evening, enjoy your meals, and enjoy the extra moments of time.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all of you. Oh, so glad